My name is Jan McVarish. I'm the Education and Events Director of the Free Speech Union. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you very much for coming. Some of you will have come back for the second time, having been to our meeting that we did in January at the Titanic Hotel. So we call these evenings speakeasies because we do think it's very, very important to provide a space for people to speak their minds at the moment, and that's the way in which we run these meetings. So when last we were here, the roof blew off the Titanic Centre just as we arrived. So I've weighed myself down with potato bread this morning. Hopefully it will do the trick. So a lot has happened since we were here in January. The government has been restored at Stormont. We've got a new government in Westminster, obviously. And we're going to discuss this evening the significance of the kinds of developments that are happening in politics for free speech in Northern Ireland and across the UK. And as you already have noticed, we've got an amazing panel here tonight who I'm going to quickly introduce. So first of all, we have to my left, we have Heather Binning. So Heather was born in Scotland, as you'll realise when she speaks. The fan club is here. She began her career in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, where she held a number of overseas postings in places from Washington, DC to Kuwait. She's an experienced businesswoman, and she went on to establish the first public internet access across the UK before becoming an economic development consultant for a range of organisations. So she's got an incredible amount of experience of the way in which organisations move and how good or bad ideas get adopted and embedded in organisations. Those of you who obviously really know Heather and are cheering for her, it's because she took up the baton of women's rights back in July 2021, bringing together a number of local women's groups across the UK, which grew to become the Women's Rights Network. The network already connects thousands of women and continues to grow with more than 60 women's rights groups across the UK. And you'll see women in the room who will very happily tell you more about the organisation. And they've also got, there was a stall at the back, or there's leaflets, and many people that will happily talk to you about it. After that, we're going to come to, actually, this isn't the speaking order, so I'm just introducing the speakers. So Kate Hoey, again, no introduction needed, really. Now she's Baroness Hoey of Lisle Hill and Rathlin. She was born in County Antrim, where her parents were farmers. She served as Labour MP for Vauxhall in South London, my neck of the woods, for 30 years, from 1989 to 2019. And was appointed the UK's first woman Minister for Sport in 1999. She gained and has maintained a reputation for being one of the most independent, non-tribal and outspoken members of Parliament. And then we'll have Simon Chambers, who again some of you will know. Simon has been practising as a litigation specialist and problem solver for nearly 25 years and is based just outside of Belfast in Newtonards at Russell and Company Solicitors. Simon also practices in family and criminal law, conveyancing and commercial matters, and he's a member of the Law Society Council and is currently pursuing 2 gender-critical discrimination cases in Northern Ireland in both the Employment Tribunal and the County Court. And at the end there is Ruth Dudley-Edwards. Again, I'm sure most of you or all of you will recognise Ruth. She's a historian, a crime novelist, political commentator, and an enthusiast for truth-telling. She runs a free speech Facebook page and has survived a number of attempts to silence her through libel actions, which she'll tell us more about later on. Again, you'll know Toby from the last time he spoke, and also those of you who are members of the Free Speech Union already will definitely know Toby. He's the General Secretary of the Free Speech Union. We are a non-partisan, mass membership public interest body that stands up for the speech rights of its members. Toby also co-founded the West London Free School and is the author of 4 books, the best known of which is How to Lose Friends and Alienate People, something which he may have put into practice at some point in his career. He's an associate editor of The Spectator, where he's written a weekly column since 1998, and he also runs a blog, which I'm sure some of you, or lots of you will read, called The Daily Skeptic, that's received over 40 million page views. And then later on, we're going to hear from Geoffrey Dudgeon. Again, lots of you will know Jeff. Jeff has held office in the Northern Ireland Gay Rights Association, NIGRA, since its founding in 1975 and has led landmark campaigns for gay rights and personal freedom. He was awarded an MBE in a 2012 honours list for services to the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender community in Northern Ireland. And between 2014 and 2019, he served as an Ulster Unionist councillor to Belfast City Council and was chair of the council's diversity working group. He's also written a couple of very interesting books as well. Okay, can we welcome our panel? So the way this is going to work is that I'm going to ask a few questions of each of our panelists, and then we're going to come out to you in the audience to ask you questions, particularly to start with, especially if you've got particular questions for the panelists. That'll be really good before we go on to sort of longer contributions. And we've got until 9:15 I think it's going to be, to pursue all of the conversations we want to have before. You can stick around for another couple of hours and have a drink in the room as well. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to go to Toby and just ask him, get him to tell us really why it is that the Free Speech Union has set up as new Northern Ireland Advisory Council, and also maybe you could tell us a bit more about what the FSU's working on at the moment and what our priorities are for the coming period.
Okay, thank you, Jan, and thanks to all of you for coming out on a Friday night. It's great that so many people are here. We actually had to put out more chairs to accommodate everybody, which is fantastic. And thanks in particular to our Northern Ireland Advisory Council. I think all of them are here tonight. So in addition to Ruth Dudley Edwards and Simon Chambers and Kate Hoey, we've also got Andrea McVeigh, who's here in the audience, and Ben Lowry, the editor-in-chief of the newsletter, and Jeff Dudgeon, who's going to be speaking a little later. So thanks to them for supporting our efforts to create a presence for the Free Speech Union in Northern Ireland. Why do I think that's important? I think free speech is under assault across the English-speaking world. It's certainly come under fire, in particular, since July 4th in the United Kingdom. And Northern Ireland is no exception. As I'm sure most of you know, and I think Simon's going to be talking about later, there was the Marinan Review, which recommended various changes to the law. And some of those changes, it was a review into hate crime and whether various forms of speech needed to be criminalized, and he concluded that they did, and it looks like they're going to be. The Justice Minister, Naomi Long, has said that she's going to incorporate the first tranche of Judge Marinan's proposals in the sentencing bill, which is going to be presented to Stormont next year. And that's just going to be the first tranche, and the others will follow, she said. So you have a really big fight on your hands if you want to defend free speech. But the good news is that the people of Northern Ireland are not particularly keen on these new laws. We hired a professional polling company to conduct an opinion poll. It was admittedly a couple of years ago, but the findings were really, really encouraging. So 61% of the respondents, this was just in Northern Ireland, felt less free to express themselves than they were 10 years ago. And amongst those aged 25 to 64, those born during and living through the Troubles, that number rose to 64%. 63% believed that refusing to use someone's preferred gender pronouns should not be a hate crime. And that obviously is one of the concerns about the various changes to the law that are going to be happening over the next few years. 80% of our respondents thought that any new hate crime legislation in Northern Ireland should include robust free speech protection, that's something that Judge Marinan had specifically said wasn't necessary. And 81% agreed that people with opposing views should be able to engage in a full and frank exchange without being prosecuted for hate speech. And I guess the last one I thought was very interesting, which is that 63% believed that including sectarianism as a hate crime would result in police being bombarded with vexatious complaints about things their political opponents had said or done. And they thought that this would aggravate sectarian tensions. It wouldn't ameliorate them. It seemed like a majority were opposed to making sectarianism specifically a hate crime, though I understand that you can receive an enhanced sentence already if sectarianism is considered to have been a motive in a crime you've committed. But that, I think, will be emphasized and underlined a lot more in the changes to the law that are coming up. 79% of the people in Northern Ireland thought that being offended was a price worth paying for freedom of speech, and 2/3 agreed that freedom of speech today is hindered by political correctness. So the findings of our poll were that there's a huge amount of support amongst the general public in Northern Ireland for free speech, no enthusiasm at all for this raft of laws coming down the pipe. And I think my hope is that the Free Speech Union can help galvanise that opposition and help create a campaign against these various changes to the law. I thought I'd talk briefly, if I had Jan, not in answering your question about what the Free Speech Union is preoccupied with, or rather, well, I thought I'd talk about what the kind of rationale is for all these hate crime laws. What is it that the people behind them are hoping to achieve? And I think it's partly a kind of typical example of the hubris of the kind of ruling class. They imagine that they can do something about the climate, that via legislation and regulation, the climate can be changed. They think they can take on and defeat viruses. And similarly ambitious and wildly unrealistic, they think that hatred can be defeated. That's a flaw in human nature that can be eradicated via legislation, regulation, police activity, which is clearly wildly overambitious and unrealistic. And when you ask them to kind of justify why they think criminalizing various forms of speech, having the police go round and record non-crime hate incidents when a hate crime is reported, and so forth, why do they think all this kind of activity is really important? Why is it going to combat hate? The rationale is often that if we criminalize various forms of hatred, if we try and nip burgeoning formed expressions of hatred in the bud before they escalate, we will contain it. That's the kind of rationale. But if you look at the effect of introducing laws, hate crime laws, criminalizing various forms of hate speech and so forth, the evidence is that they don't actually result in a reduction in the number of hate crimes being reported. A law was passed in the United States after a gay man was killed. It was a famous hate crime, and actually after that law was passed, hate crime reports increased. In the UK, the first tranche of laws that Naomi Long wants to introduce in the sentencing bill, they've already been introduced in the UK, hasn't caused any reduction in hate crime reporting. Turns out that it's not very easy to legislate against hatred. But interestingly, when you point this out to the advocates of legislating against hatred, it doesn't land, it just washes over them. And Harry Miller, a great opponent of non-crime hate incidents who we've worked alongside for many years now, he FOI'd every police force in England and Wales last year to find out if they'd done any analysis of whether the recording of non-crime hate incidents had resulted in a reduction of hate crimes. So they'd been recorded since 2014. We estimate that about 250,000 have been recorded in the past 10 years. That's an average of about 65 a day. Have they had any discernible impact on reducing hate crime, which is the theory behind them? If you record people committing acts of hostility supposedly motivated by hatred, it will send a warning shot, and they will be less likely to commit hate crimes thereafter. And Harry asked if they'd done any analysis. Turned out they hadn't. They hadn't tried to do any kind of analysis. They hadn't even, in many cases, recorded the data in a way that you would be able to do any kind of granular analysis. And the reason is they don't really care. They don't really care because when they say that legislating against hate crime, encouraging the police to record non-crime hate incidents is a way of reducing hatred or hate crime, they don't really believe it. It's just rhetoric. What it's really about is punishing heretics. They are like people in the grip of a religious cult, but one of the facets of this religious cult is that the people in the grip of it aren't aware that they're in the grip of a religious cult. Like Keir Starmer, they think they're unburdened by doctrine. It's a fascinating characteristic, I think, of our ruling class, is that they act like the Spanish Inquisition. They want to punish people for heresy, but they think that they're Galileo. That's, I think, quite a dangerous cocktail. And it's also sort of quite mysterious. Why don't they just say, the reason we want to punish people who say trans women aren't women is because we regard that as heresy. They're trespassing on what we think of as a sacred value. Instead, they come up with all kinds of scientific-sounding, supposedly evidence-based rationalizations for this, because they don't want to own that they are, in fact, prosecuting a dogmatic moral agenda, which is curious, and perhaps we can discuss why that is later. But I thought maybe it might be useful just to go into a little bit why it is that free speech is under assault, not just in Northern Ireland, but across the English-speaking world and beyond, with all these attempts to criminalise speech and prohibit hate speech. I think ultimately it boils down to wanting to punish heresy, wanting to penalise people who trespass on values that the professional managerial class regard as sacred, sacrosanct, cannot be questioned.
We're going to go to Simon, and Simon's going to very hopefully outline his sort of analysis of what has been proposed so far by the Justice Minister when it comes to hate crime.
Thank you, Jan. The Justice Minister announced last week that she proposed only to introduce aspects of the Marinan recommendations via an aggravation offence model, which would be a bolt-on to existing crimes rather than create a new offence in and of itself. There have been some whispers, or perhaps it's wishful thinking, that the Justice Department officials have recognised the turmoil, controversy and attendant policing costs that have befallen Scotland and Ireland, and are quietly pressing for a shift away from full implementation of Marinan. But there's no such humility from our Minister, who blames time constraints and the Department's need to triage on the basis of emerging priorities for the watered-down legislation, and she made a rather ominous promise to implement all of Marinan's recommendations in the next legislative mandate. In the Assembly last April, the Minister stated that she had no plans to introduce a provision describing somebody's biological sex or misgendering as a crime, and any legislation would be developed in accordance with Articles 9 and 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which are the freedom of thought, conscience and religion, and also the freedom of expression, with the intention being to protect all private conversations irrespective of where they take place. Interestingly, however, during that same debate, the Minister accused some of those who had commented on the Scottish and Irish bills of quite deliberately stirring up hatred. Of concern, however, is also the comment by the Minister in last week's announcement of an intent to legislate to allow new protected groups to be added by regulation in the future. And there's been an alarming mission creep of such regulatory instruments being made since the days of COVID and the time of emergency powers. And these despairingly continue at no less a rate, even in these non-emergency times. This leads to poor lawmaking with little or no public or parliamentary scrutiny or debate, and hastily passed laws create problems of compliance, enforcement and comprehension. This backdoor on the proposed legislation is thus a warning of problems to come, and perhaps a tacit admission by the Minister that the proposed legislation will be a movable feast, adaptable to the whims of any special interest group du jour. The Minister also proposes to add sex, gender and age as protected characteristics. Here in Northern Ireland, we have already the benefit of protection for religious groups and racial groups, and we feel that this will lead to fertile ground for misrepresentation and misinterpretation, as all this is to be placed in the hands of the investigating police officer. The current law and manner of dealing with prosecutions may require some updating, as it cannot be proper, even from a defendant's perspective, that they stand vulnerable to a late bolt-on by the judge in Northern Ireland when sentencing of a racially motivated aggravating feature, as this would lead to a lack of proper opportunity to prepare a defence. However, given that the Justice Department has been promising implementation of the Marinan Review for 3 years now, it does appear to be a massive opportunity lost to embark upon a robust cogitation and debate of a proper definition of the offence itself and any potential defences, and more practically, to introduce a strategy, for example, to deal with violence towards women and girls. Another alarming recommendation of Marinan is that a judge should take into account not only hostility, but bias, prejudice, bigotry, or contempt, each of which lower the evidential bar further still. Each additional factor here will only give the police and the PPS more scope to add subjectivity when laying charges. I have witnessed in my own practice an alarming rise in the application by the police and the PPS of an eye of the beholder perspective when considering charges of the recently introduced coercive and controlling behaviour charges, when considering, on occasion, weaponised by the complainant without any rigorous examination. Objective assessments are blithely ignored in the push to hit conviction rates. I have little doubt that the same zeal will be applied by PSNI and the PPS upon introduction of the new proposed offences. This will lead to demonisation of defendants at a much earlier stage of the process by dint of the simple reporting of the charge. For example, an individual simply charged with assault of an elderly gentleman outside a pub is unlikely to lose their job. However, the publication of an assault aggravated by hostility under the hate crimes legislation under, for example, ageism, would lead likely to a loss of employment and social status prior to any conviction or trial. I would hold concerns about the level and delivery of training provided to the PSNI and the PPS. I think, in fact, it's taken 2 years to train the police in Scotland, and we've seen there, you know, the cost that's been felt across the board there. And the PPS, in considering whether to apply such a charge and whether it could or will remain untainted by special interest groups who might have some say in delivering that training or influencing who provides same. All of this really casts a pall on the continuing ability to exercise free speech and even to cause offence. The Court of Protected Speech was examined by the European Court of Human Rights in 1980 in a UK case, which found that protected speech means not only information or ideas that are favourably received or regarded as inoffensive or as a matter of indifference, but also to those that offend, shock, or disturb. Such are the demands of that pluralism, tolerance, and broad-mindedness, without which there is no democratic society. Even in the domestic courts in the UK, a 2020 case held as follows. Free speech includes not only the inoffensive, but the irritating, the contentious, the eccentric, the heretical, the unwelcome, and the provocative, provided it does not tend to provoke violence. Freedom only to speak inoffensively is not worth having. I fear the road to disconnecting the consequential act of violence from the speech itself is now well laid and has already been embarked upon by our Justice Ministry.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon. And I think I should say that down the line, as the legislative proposals take shape, I think we can do specialist events that really focus in on what's being proposed and kind of offering a critique of those, and hopefully get some representatives from the government to come and justify what they're proposing. That would be excellent. Okay, I'm now going to come to Kate. And Kate, we're going to take advantage of the fact that you've come over from Westminster. That's where you're ordinarily based in the House of Lords. So could you sort of give us a sense of what your take is on where the new government is likely to take us, what their intentions are, and possibly what their instincts are when it comes to freedom of speech?
Right. Well, thank you, and thanks for inviting me to be here. And I really want to start by just thanking the Free Speech Union for including Northern Ireland integrally in part of everything that it's done, because very often in Northern Ireland, institutions and organisations in Great Britain sort of see us as still a place apart and that they don't really get involved. And I'm so pleased, particularly because some of the things that are happening with the newly formed executive has been outlined, and we'll hear later too, show that actually Northern Ireland can be almost a seedbed for things that then happen elsewhere. So thank you, Toby and Jan, and everyone who's putting in that work. Since I came back to live in Northern Ireland full time, I've actually been very disappointed at the way the media, most elements of the media, and BBC NI particularly, aren't interested in issues like this and do very little coverage apart from a few individuals. And I think that, sadly, even more than in Great Britain, the establishment here, the lawyers, the civil servants, the academia, they all seem to feel that somehow, in order to show that they've really broken with the past, sectarianism and all of that sort of has been so prevalent in Northern Ireland, that they have to sign up to every single progressive cause. Now, what I just want to talk a little bit about is what's been happening. And I would say to anybody, and I don't suppose there are many people here, who woke up on the morning after the general election and thought, great, Labour government, everything's going to change. We're going to have wonderful on all these issues. And of course, we have seen that not only is the Labour government going to be not changing anything for the good, but actually it's going to be much, much worse. We've been used to Keir Starmer over the past number of years as leader of the opposition. And remember, I'm no longer in the Labour Party, haven't been now for some years, and I'm very pleased I'm not. He is used to taking U-turns. And actually, he's just announced today, by the way, a U-turn that he's not going to take any more free clothes and glasses. So that's a kind of I mean, he had just announced that about an hour ago or 2 hours ago. Anyway, looking at the Lords and what's been happening, I mean, what we've seen really here is that some of the better things that we managed to happen during the last year or so in the Lords, for example, the online safety bill, which was fought very, very hard to get it to be less draconian. And almost immediately, Labour has said that they want to reopen that and bring back the very important wording, legal but harmful. And that was something that we got out of the bill and stopped it going in. And then they want to allow the police to have the offence of non-crime hate. So you can be cautioned and it stays on your record. That's another sort of change. And of course, they're working on a trans-inclusive conversion therapy bill. For next session, they're going to work on it for the next year and consult. And that, of course, would mean that even parents who wanted to sort of say to their child, look, if the child was saying, I want a new body, I'm not in my own body. If the parent said, look, actually, I think you need to look at that, that's nonsense, that they could actually be prosecuted. And that is a really dangerous, that whole bill is just riddled with things that could happen that would make it very, very difficult for all sorts of people. And of course, the thing that really quite upset me, and I think upset a lot of people, but a lot of people didn't want to speak out, and it was whether you were in favour of abortion or not. The idea that you would actually criminalise people for praying silently at abortion buffer clinic, at the buffer zones and those sorts of things. And then the one which was very, very annoying was the tearing up of the higher education bill, which took ages to get through. And it's another indictment of the way they're prepared to not do anything really to enhance free speech, because the higher education bill did have a section in it. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it did have a section which enhanced and gave universities the right to have, or they had to enhance a positive duty to promote free speech. And of course, it's also done away with the opportunity for students and others to be able to take that legal redress. So that was a very, very negative thing that they did just as soon as they got re-elected. So I'm afraid, freedom is very low down the priorities of the Labour government. And I don't think we're going to see anything that would make any of us in this room think, goodness, that really is a benefit. We've seen all the wording that they use now. Misinformation has become the new trendy word. I asked a question in the Lords about, was the government also going to take responsibility for misinformation? In other words, that part where they basically said that anyone who is out protesting peacefully over the recent problems that we've had on the streets across the United Kingdom, even if you were peacefully demonstrating, you were labelled as far right. And that to me was a misinformation that was just as shocking as some of the things that perhaps they might have been trying to stop. And we've seen all of that during the recent riots and the attempts to label people and not to allow anyone to express an opinion that might not fit into the actual cultural idea of the establishment of what is right and what is wrong. But there's one bit of just, finally, just on one other very important thing, we all got a letter at the beginning of September, every member of the House of Lords, signed up by the government chief whip, the opposition chief whip, the convener of the crossbench peers, which are a very, very important part of the House of Lords. That's all the sort of, the great and the good, former chancellors of universities, permanent secretaries at the European Union, civil servants, top judges, all of the very much the sort of great and the good. And they signed up to it as well, of course, understandably, as the Liberal Democrats, who tend to sign up to anything that looks like gives them a little bit of a headline. And it was actually talking to all of us about welcoming us back and then talking about how we needed to be careful in our debates facing the difficult issues that the country face. It's important that we do so with courtesy. Well, we usually are very courteous in the House of Lords, to wish to listen and read the debates. It's especially important against the backdrop within the public domain of increasing misinformation and fear. And we as a House must ensure a debate that does not descend into vitriol, fine, use of false facts, or use of rhetoric designed to offend and inflame. Now it may just, when you read it first glance, you might think, oh, that's fine, that's all about politeness and being nice. But actually, it's a very, very, I think, worrying, and many of us in the House of Lords have felt that was a very worrying, almost threat to people. Even in the House of Lords, you have to say the right thing, otherwise you're going to be, people are going to find it that there's some kind of retribution. But finally, the one bit of good news, I hope it's going to be good news, it will be finalised at the beginning of October. Obviously, as Jan has said, as a former Minister of Sport, I'm very, very interested in sport, and I know there's going to be perhaps more discussion on that later, but we have managed every year, the House of Lords gets 3 special select committees. And we've been trying for some time to get one, which has gone in now, supported by Baroness Hayter, myself, Baroness Ludford, Baroness Jenkin, Lord Wasserman and Lord Treesman. And it's an inquiry into an inclusion in sport. The terms of reference would be to review sports bodies' policies of female inclusion in amateur and elite sports with reference to their biological sex as compared to gender, and to make recommendations. And if we get that, that is a really big opportunity, I think, for a select committee to look at this all in a very independent way, but to come out with what I think will be common sense at the end of it. So that's my point.
Thank you, Kate. And now we're going to turn to Heather. So Heather, I'm not sure, some of you will know that Heather was present at the Robinsons Bar and is part of that cabal. What were you? I'm not sure. Who were unceremoniously booted out of Robinsons Bar, and we can talk about that case a bit more. Simon can update us on what's going on with that case, and can explain a bit more about it. But the reason I reference that is because Heather has really been at the front line of the attempts to silence women who want, and others, but largely women, who have wanted to challenge the sort of no debate mantra that had become normalised through Stonewall and other kind of activists who've really stepped up with the silencing tools. I mean, it's kind of just keeps growing, the list of silencing words. It was phobes, it was ists, now it's just right-wing. I mean, those of us who come from the left have given up being puzzled by this and given up, to be honest, fighting against it, because there's nothing you can say to detach yourself from that label once it's been applied. And so we just kind of learned to shrug it off in the same way that TERFs have learned to either shrug off the label or embrace it. But Heather has organised in order to try to help many people push back on those slurs and make sure that women haven't been silenced. So I wanted Heather really just to sort of tell us what is it that you've learned from that process about how important free speech is?
Free speech is so important, but we don't have it. We just don't have free speech in this country right now. One of the reasons that what I started has become so successful is because it's given women the voice to talk amongst themselves. When they talk publicly, they either don't talk publicly. If they talk on social media, they're using avatars, fake names. In the house, I experienced this myself, in the house, often the families will break up. Families have broken up. And this is very real in Northern Ireland as well. The reason that I am here, I'm from Scotland, live in London, but I'm over here, and I love coming over here, and I love the women here. But it's because they cannot speak. None of the group here, which numbers somewhere between 100 and 200, depending on how far down the reviewing line they've got, whether they're a confirmed member or a wannabe member. None of them could come up here and speak for themselves in Northern Ireland. Particularly bad for them in Northern Ireland. It's like this elsewhere in the country as well. Scotland and England, and we've Wales too. So it's particularly bad for them here. It's the lies that are told. There's a barrister called Sam Falls that goes on Twitter and tells, scathing lies about the fact that because I believe in women's rights and the right for a woman to determine who it is that provides her intimate care for her or for her family member, who it is that she's in a dressing room with or a changing room with, because of that, they decided that I hate a certain section of society and I should be subject to hate crime legislation. That is not true. I don't hate them. I don't hate anybody. But I want the rights that we should have. And most importantly, I want to be able to speak about those rights. It fills me with dread if we don't stop this happening, if we don't stop the fear. It is fear. Women are frightened about their jobs, about their families, about their relationships. This thing has captured us because automatically, to say the wrong word, automatically defines you as some kind of manic monster with hatred in their hearts. You need to see the women. I hope you don't think that I'm pretty representative. We're pretty, on the whole, pretty middle class, pretty mild, pretty meek. It's pacifist demonstration. We talk to people, we persuade people, we encourage people. We don't go around inciting others to violence. We don't hate people. So it's a quite meek feminist movement, but we are determined. We're very determined and we're very passionate because rights that most of us remember some decades ago when we didn't have equal rights in employment and so on. You could argue we're not quite there yet either. But there were rights that were fought hard by us, by our mothers, by our sisters. And we've got those rights, and they are being swept away in a heartbeat by this ideology that tells us that we have to accept that a man can become a woman. And it's just biologically inaccurate, scientifically inaccurate, and there's nothing in this world that will make me believe that. But the threat from free speech, if we're not able to stop it, it's going to advance. There are some things that we can still talk about. So surrogacy is a bit of a controversial subject for many. Some are for it, some are against it. The Scottish government is advertising for eggs at the moment. It wants young women from the age of 18 to come forward and allow their eggs to be harvested at the cost of £150 each. And last year they spent £180,000 advertising that. Now, whether you think that's right or wrong, this is damaging to women. This is a dangerous process for them to go through. We need to be able to talk about whether that's right or wrong, because there is a lobby that says that's absolutely right, and we should harvest the eggs from women to do. We need to have that debate. We don't get proper progress. We don't advance society and advance humanity if we don't have proper debate about the issues. And if we're not able to shed the light on these issues that we're facing now, it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. On the legislative changes that might be coming up, I just want to support the idea, and Toby said that the people in Northern Ireland don't support what's going. We have absolute evidence of that from the numbers of people that come forward for us. But also, they didn't support it in Wales. They didn't support it in Scotland. Still went forward. In some ways, it has to go forward for it to be shown up to be the nonsense that it is, which has happened in both Scotland previously and Wales just this last week when they were finally forced to backtrack on their gender quota bill, which allowed self-identification of men as women by the back door to allow for 50% female representation or representation by women in the Senate. And they rolled back on that. It's a long way to go, but that was a small step in the right direction. But the people of Wales didn't support it. People of Scotland didn't support the GRR bill last year. People in Northern Ireland won't be supporting any bills that are put forward. The people of the UK will not be supporting the bills put forward. I'm talking about the conversion therapy for one, likely to be the first one to hit. And I have to say, I didn't used to be a fan of the Lords, but I'm relying on the Lords to knock these things back when it gets their case.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have arrived at that position against our previous political positions, I think. I just wanted to add something to what you said about fear, actually. And one indication of that is that today, Slugger O'Toole, Brian's here from Slugger O'Toole, and they very kindly published a piece by one of our Belfast members about why the left has to stand up for free speech and actually has to step up and stop playing a kind of tribal game and assuming that those who defend free speech are only doing it for cynical reasons to pursue a particular agenda. It's really great that Slugger O'Toole ran that piece, but it was really noticeable that the author cannot use their real name. That's a really bad sign. Nothing in that article was controversial, and nothing in that article was, saying anything remotely that should be beyond the pale. And yet they can't use their name because they're fearful of the consequences for them, because they know what happens, which is that those who oppose them will go for them, and they will go for them in their workplaces and various different places. So that's really the kind of culture that we've got to try and challenge. And so I just wanted to kind of flag that up and also point you towards looking up that article, because it's a really, really good defence of free speech. And so now we're going to come to Ruth, who's all the way at the end. So Ruth, you have survived numerous attempts to silence you and your freedom to write and to write books and to write journalism through a different kind of silencing tool, the threat of libel law, and what's particularly known as slaps. So could you just explain to us how libel has been used against you, and maybe also come on to what slaps are? People may not know what that term is, but maybe you could explain that to us as well.
Well, I could make this terribly complicated, but I'm not going to. I can avoid it, because I tried to keep up with what's happening in the Irish Republic, where I come from, in Northern Ireland, which I came to love, and in England, where I live. So, the legislation and all this is different. What is basically, I think, true is that what I have realized, what all those jurisdictions have in common, is sensible, ordinary people who are saying, we don't like this, and up with it, we will not put. And they're essentially on the side of free speech. So we always have to remember that, and we always have to bear them in mind. I wrote books of a not particularly contentious kind, and I did non-political journalism until 1994, when I began to write about the IRA, which bothered me a great deal. And I remember the first tranche of furious mail. I'd never had the experience of that before. So I was in my late 40s, and I remember picking up the first one. The issue then was that the IRA had gone on, not ceasefire, cessation, they called it. So they had kindly said they wouldn't kill us for a couple of years, possibly a couple of years. But we were to make haste to have a settlement that suited them. And I wrote a critical article about this, essentially saying, don't give the buggers anything, which is my general line. And I still remember the first letter. Remember, people had to write abusive letters in those days. They had to go and find a stamp and an envelope and a pen. So you had to give them A for effort. So I opened this one. I don't remember if it was in green ink, but it should have been. And it said it was taking deep offence at my suggestions that the lads were not serious about peace and that they might go back to war. And in order to make this point, he was unable to resist saying, I can't wait for the lads to go back to work and blow your ugly fucking head off. I saw a certain level of contradiction in this. But I was a little unnerved by it because I wasn't used to this sort of thing. And I took it to the then tenant of my affections, who I was in a relationship for many years. And I said this was a bit disconcerting. And he said, great, you're making an impact now as a journalist, go for it. So at every stage, when sensible friends of mine were saying, why are you getting involved in covering Drumcree? Why are you taking on the IRA? All the rest of it. He would say, how many death threats this week? Not enough, you're not trying hard enough. So I owe that guy an awful lot. And it has actually been fine once social media got going. I got bucket loads of abuse, as you can imagine, and I've always found it funny. I really do. I have another friend, some of you will know Maria Cahill, who is, like me, a tough boot. Not an old boot like me, but a tough one. And we compare insults. You know, I got a better one than you this time. And they are entertaining. If you look at them, you have to remember to look at people in this way. Look at our opponents, because they're awful depressed, sad people with a very limited vocabulary. But honestly, some of it, there are two contrasting storylines going on about me on Twitter particularly. There's the one that says, I have a lot of cats. I don't actually have any cats. I have a lot of cats. I'm a sad, bitter old bigot who lives alone with on a urine-stained carpet. You know, in the smell of cat's piss. I remember that was the other day. Yeah. And they vie. I mean, they obviously don't use a thesaurus, but they do know that if you Google, you'll get some more rude words. But so, you know, witch, crone, old cow, old bat, all the rest of it, that comes to mind. But then there's the other narrative, and they never connect and argue with each other. The other one says that I am very rich because of all the bribes I took from media moguls, and I live in an estate in Surrey. What were today's names? I wrote a disobliging piece about the late Pat Finucane. So today it was just sad, bitter old bigot and disgusting ghoul. I was quite impressed with that. It was well spelt. The H was in ghoul. Who was trolling the Irish people, which have given me a level of importance I haven't had before. I don't know how you troll the Irish people, but that's what I'm at anyway. So that's how I am with, I was actually thinking idly that maybe instead of pronouns, we could have badges with our favorite insults on them. So I think I'll choose fascist crone because I'm a fascist now. And I'm certainly a crone. So that's how I deal with this stuff. And honestly, none of it does anything but make me laugh and ring up Maria and say, I got a better one today. But what's important about knowing about the Shinners is the Shinner bots, as they are known, they do have an effect on stifling free speech. They do frighten people. They disgust them. They upset them. They drive them away from social media. And they are, of course, orchestrated. And this is why we're not talking about free speech in the normal way here. There is the enemy of free speech in Northern Ireland. It's all driven by Sinn Féin. It is because they want control, and they want to control people. So they have an army of Shinner bots, and they absolutely work under instructions. And this is always disputed. You know, Mary Lou MacDonald will explain that no, it's just that the people are aroused with horror and shock at the nasty things you said. But it's not like that, because I remember, I still treasure this actually, there was a stage when my colleague on the Sunday Independent, Owen Harris, got into terrible trouble because he had written an article opposing Mary Lou MacDonald in which he had said she was stirring the pot politically. And the cartoonist on the thing had shown a picture of a witch in a tall hat. And as one man, the Shinner bots were in action and all this. Now, these are the people who called me a witch and a crone all the time. But overnight, Owen Harris became attacked for using such language. Anybody using the word witch was now a bad person. And overnight, I no longer was a witch, I was now just old. And it was taxing for them, you know, and my sympathy goes out to them sometimes. But the point was, they switch on and off. Absolutely, they're a trained mob. So that's where I am with the social media. Now, the law cases that came up, I mean, I was quite honoured by this, really. John Finucane was being touted as a future president of Ireland, for God's sake, and the fellow's thick. But, you know, not that that stops you becoming president of Ireland, I have to say, recently. But I had lawsuits coming from Finucane, from Michelle O'Neill. Yes, she honoured me for saying she was a hypocrite about it. She had to withdraw the case because, unfortunately, she was involved in a very large funeral, which actually contradicted all the laws she passed, so she dropped that one. John Finucane, he was going very hard after me. I had said he was an apologist for the IRA. My God, what a thing to say. I mean, how hurt the fellow's feelings were. So I have a good, somebody who I would regard as a serious ally, who runs a blog I recommend to you all, called Irish Peace Process. Shane Paul O'Doherty, he was once a terrorist, and he's ashamed of everything he did. And he takes it out on the Sinn Féin sympathisers by doing very, very well-researched blogs on various issues. And I sent him the legal letter, and he said, leave it with me. And about 3 weeks later, I got this wonderful dossier on every Finucane that ever existed, as far as I could see, and including their Granny Finucane. Boy, she was a goer. And John, and various places here. He'd appeared and made speeches and the things he'd said, and his Uncle Dermot and his Uncle Seamus, who were put up by Her Majesty quite for long periods, who were out and out hideous terrorists. So Shane and I discussed what to do with this, and we decided to put it on social media, the dossier, and he never wrote to me again. So there are things you can do, and we must remember as individuals. A lot of this was before the Free Speech Union came along, which has made everything different for people like me, because there is a security now. Now, you still don't feel free to say what you like. And newspapers, I can't write what I was writing 10 years ago, except on social media. I can't write the sort of articles I did. Newspapers are running scared because the Shinners were taking them to court for everything. Now, it is a big help. I mean, you may say, how can they afford to do this? I remind you of the Northern Bank robbery 20 years ago. 26 million quid goes a long way, even if you're employing lawyers. And they have detachments of lawyers, and they use them. I mean, they go through, certainly in their heyday, they were going to every academic book published on Ireland to see if somebody had slipped up. A friend of mine got done because it referred to somebody as being an ex-prisoner because he was chairman of the Ex-Prisoners Association. But it couldn't, because of a technicality, he hadn't been an ex-prisoner. So that had the book taken off the shelves. So, I mean, that was an awful tyranny. Now, slaps. Slaps came into the game some time back. And then I'll get on to Jerry Kelly, who is my very favourite person at the moment. Slaps, strategic lawsuit against public participation, which essentially means that you are trying to shut people up. And you're trying to do it not over one small issue. And what you have is a political party which is dedicated to shutting up its critics. Fortunately, this was, I mean, I've seen people utterly and absolutely terrified by this. Because the fact of the matter is, if you have a small income, or even a little bit more than small, it costs you money to answer a solicitor's letter threatening you with a lawsuit. You live in fear because you have a house that you could lose. You are terrified because you know these people have limitless funds. And they started suing politicians as well. I mean, some poor, unfortunate DUP councillor was sued. You know, he didn't have money to resist, and people caved in all the time. So the deal was quite simple, really, where, you know, you promised to be good and never to say anything again, and not be a nuisance, and you went quiet. Editors were terrified. So the fact that slaps has come into the news is good news for people like us. Now, Jerry Kelly, then, I have a principle, a belief that actually the bad people always overreach because they get greedy. And Jerry Kelly was the case in point for me, because he was the one who went through with the case. And I mean, he must have been completely and utterly nuts. I said he'd shot a prison officer in the head. He used to travel Northern Ireland with a book in which he boasted about his prison escape and what a brilliant job he did and how they got out of the jail and everything else. He didn't actually say, I shot this guy. He said, well, there was two of us there, and tee-hee. So that was Jerry. So I happen to have friends, I didn't have to involve the Free Speech Union, because I have good friends who are lawyers. And we must always remember the decent lawyers who have done things pro bono over the years. And we stuck it through. And in the end, Jerry Kelly had a judge saying, Malachy O'Doherty and I were the two people. We were sued separately, but it was the same case. The judge threw it out as scandalous, frivolous, and vexatious. The judge said it was aimed at stifling just critics. It was absolutely savage ruling. And the thing is, for the first time ever, Jerry Kelly, somebody who was suing for libel had to pay the costs of the people they were suing. So he paid Malachy's costs and he paid my costs. And Shillers did not like this very much. It also made him look like an idiot. I mean, he is a bit of an idiot, but he's a very dangerous idiot. So what we have going for us, and we have to keep remembering this, you've got the hubris of the ruling classes, which Toby was talking about, the punishing of heretics. All these things are true. But all of these things are done by people, and people are vulnerable, even terrorists. All of them. They don't want to be made to look foolish. So what I would suggest is, what can we do? We can all support the Free Speech Union for a start. I think it's miraculously successful. And it gives people comfort and hope and courage. And that's very important. And people like us crowdfund for people, and Toby's outfit will tell you how to do it. He'll provide you with the right people to take on the case. But you have to remember, in the end, as individuals, we mustn't get frightened by these people. Laugh at them. They hate being laughed at. always laugh at them. Any chance you get, laugh at them. Jerry Kelly was very frightening when he had a gun in his hand. But he doesn't have a gun in his hand anymore. He's an aging man who's just been revealed to be a fool.
Thank you very much to our panel. So we've covered a huge area there of existing law that may be coming down the line, as well as the kind of really deep cultural impact of attempts to silence, right the way into familial relationships, as Heather described. So I think we should just come straight out to you guys in the audience. And what would be really good is if we had like really direct questions to a particular panelist to start with. Rob at the back has got a microphone, so do you want to put your hand up if you've got a particular question for one of our panelists that you would like them to come back on? Yes, down here. Just wait for the microphone. Hang on a sec. There's a microphone coming your way. Thank you.
Okay, well, it's actually to everybody, but I prepared the survey, and do you mind if I read it out? Now, first of all, I am a member of the Free Speech Union, so this isn't supposed to be like a trolling question or anything, but I'm afraid over the last few years, I've come to a reluctant conclusion based on events in the UK and elsewhere during the years of lockdown and vaccine mandates, and also the treatment of Canadian truckers during the weeks of the Freedom Convoy, that not only governments, but a majority of the population in the West do not regard freedom as a high priority, will view what they regard as safety as more important. Some opinion polls a few years ago showed that the majority of people polled favoured harsher treatment of the Canadian truckers, and also in the UK, a majority appeared to favour harsher punishment for those refusing vaccines, etc. So, although I greatly admire the work the Free Speech Union has done in respect to people affected by cancel culture, but these will of necessity be a small number of people affected, and this necessitates legal action is expensive, can take some time, and does not always guarantee a victory. There's little, if any, sign that these small victories have an inhibitory effect on public bodies, media, or individuals which promote cancel culture. The recent actions of the Labour government in Britain following the riots showing a doubling or perhaps a tripling down of dissent.
Stop you there, just because I understand the question, and because we'll run out of time otherwise. So I tell you what, I'm going to leave that one hanging, and we can have that there for people to answer as to whether the kind of addressing particular issues really can have the cumulative effect of trying to overturn a general lack of appreciation of freedom amongst the wider population, if I think that's what you were saying. Right, now let's have a direct question if possible. So there's a lady over here, Rob. If you let me know who you'd like in particular to answer that.
Hi, I'm just wondering, I've actually got 3 different panelists that'd like to answer 3 different parts, if that's all right. For Simon, being on the legal side, I'm wondering if there's any way you can reinvigorate. We can all try and make use of the Magna Carta and common law again. And then I'll quickly give these questions so you can answer when you're ready. Kate, I'm wondering, I heard last week that they're getting rid of a lot of people in the House of Lords, and they're replacing them with more woke people. I was wondering if you've heard anything about this and what effect you've seen on this. Like people in the House of Lords are being kicked out or something like that, and more being put in. And then finally, Toby, I was wondering if you could try and see. I worry about things like, for example, evangelizing towards Muslims. Whenever you're trying to address the religion critically and offer just simple facts. You're not trying to offend or anything like that, but just normal people having a discussion, a debate about religion or trying to convert other people. Is it so dangerous now, and how far do you think it'll go before it's considered extreme hate speech? Thank you.
You really got your money's worth there, but they were very good questions. Okay, so Simon, do you want to come in to the first question about Magna Carta and common law? Is there room for reviving that?
I'm afraid you're on a busted flush. this concept of common law, and we have common law, it's case law that is recent. That is what judgments have been set down, and that's what we should be looking for, not some sort of document from 900 years ago, which really doesn't really give an awful lot of assistance on a practical level to anything we're dealing with today. This is something that has taken hold, and it is based on a fallacy, if you like. You know, we as lawyers are being approached, and notary publics as well, but you're ploughing the wrong furrow in this common law Magna Carta reliance, because it's not going to get you anywhere. You know, we need to focus on more realistic and real life legislation and cases to make the law your friend.
Thanks, Simon. So, Kate, did you get that question about the House of Lords? Yeah.
Well, just there are 92 hereditary peers, and yes, the commitment from the new government is that they're going to be got rid of. Of course, what the government is likely to do is turn some of them into life peers, particularly those who work very, very hard. And I have to say that the hereditary peers actually turn up and work harder and are very involved, a lot more than some of the life peers. And that's probably because they have been elected, even if it's only by their own little group. So the chances are that those positions, some of them, a small number, will come back as life peers. But there's no doubt about it, the government will use that as an opportunity to put in a lot more people. It's very interesting, everyone goes on about the House of Lords and how big it is. And yes, there are, if you add everybody up, there's something like 800 life peers. We had a hugely important vote just the week before we finished for the conference season. And it was a vote on the taking away the pensions, the winter payment fuel. 138 people voted to keep the situation as it was, and in other words, what the government wanted to do, and 30, including myself, voted against. So in terms of the size of the Lords, when it came to really something like that, crucial vote, so many Lords just abstained and stayed away. So I think there is a danger that, you know, it will change. There will be a lot of changes, and you know, while we are unelected, we can't actually stop forever government business when they've got a mandate, and there is a kind of agreement that we will only send things back and forward, ping pong a few times. But ultimately, you know, it's part of this change that I think Labour will want to do, and all sorts of things about. They think that somehow it's very progressive to be changing the constitutional issues, that's what people care about. Frankly, I don't actually think the vast majority of people care too much about the House of Lords. They care much more about whether governments carry out what they say they're going to do when they get elected.
Thanks, Kate. And then, Toby, on the question about, well, the distinction, I suppose, between prejudice against Muslims and Islamophobia, and what's being threatened when it comes to regulating Islamophobia.
Yes, well, Kate earlier set out a comprehensive list of all the threats that the present government poses to free speech. But I'd add to that the risk that Islamophobia is going to be criminalised in some way. And the Labour Party has endorsed the all-party parliamentary group on British Muslims definition of Islamophobia, which includes any criticism of the religion of Islam. And one of the quirks of this definition is that it would make the life of historians of Islam very difficult, because one of the things classified as Islamophobia in the extended statement when this definition was published by the all-party parliamentary group was any suggestion that Islam has been imposed at any time in history by force is Islamophobic. So that would mean that Tom Holland could be prosecuted for Islamophobia. And I don't think the risk that this will be included in a bill of some kind is particularly great. I don't think that this government would have the balls to actually introduce a Muslim blasphemy law by primary legislation. The way it'll be done is via the back door. So it'll be advice to the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Crown Prosecution Service that if someone says that Islam has been imposed by force on some populations in some parts of the world, that should be classified as stirring up hatred on religious grounds, which is already an offence under the Public Order Act. The police will be encouraged, they already have been encouraged by Yvette Cooper, to record Islamophobia, broadly defined as non-crime hate incidents. So I think we will see the gradual prohibition, the introduction of an Islamic blasphemy code, but it won't be via primary legislation. It'll be through the back door.
Thanks, Toby. Right. And other direct questions? It's actually very good if you direct them to a particular panelist. Yes, there's a chap over here, Rob. If you stick your hand right up, you can see. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask a question to Simon, please? So the last few years, I've been looking into the pharmaceutical industry and vaccines, for example. And one thing I've come to see with free speech is in some places, there are whistleblowers, for example, in the pharmaceutical industry, who, for whatever reason, are not taken seriously and often denigrated and ignored. But in other areas, such as, for example, historical abuse, the public's becoming aware that we have whistleblowers and we should listen to them when you have institutional failings, rather than just trying to silence them. How do you think we can best address the challenges to getting out very important information from these huge corporations and industries like the pharmaceutical industry, where there's such massive amounts of financial interests? Because I think it's causing not only lack of free speech, but material harm to the public, because they're not aware of information that the whistleblowers are trying to bring out.
Thank you. Simon?
The difference between the two examples that you used there really can be money is the big differential there. The pharmaceutical industries have unlimited monies and they can use that to silence, they can use that to intimidate, they can use that to play out in the media through their own soft-soaping scientific reviews, etc. Which, of course, that's going to play out in a whistleblowing scenario. Anybody that attacks them, they will defend it and they will use whatever powers they have at their disposal to defend themselves and silence the voice, the critical voice. What do we do about it? It's a damn good question. Successive governments have ducked away from the issue. Why is that? Same answer: money, vested interests. At least we're not in the situation where we are in the United States, where it's absolutely embedded and deep-rooted within the Senate, the Congress, and everything else. We're not at that level. We have degrees of scrutiny and independence there. It's just about whether media and supportive institutions stand up. Whether that requires legislation, I'm not sure of the present position. I have to have a look at that. But we are in a better state than other parts of the world. That's without question. But it sounds like a very worthwhile subject that you've looked into. Thanks for raising.
Thanks, Simon. And Heather wanted to say something about whistleblowing as well.
A couple of things to say about that. One is, God bless whistleblowers. Not big pharma, but the reason we knew what the Welsh government were trying to do with this gender equality bill, and we were able to expose it, was whistleblower insight, that we got advance warning of it when we were able to put our ducks in a row. So God bless them. Every organisation has people in it that are not happy with what's going on and are prepared to do something about it. They may not be able to go public, but they are prepared to, there are ways and angles. On the big money side of things, we're also aware of a trick that is being used. Very wealthy individuals investing in very, very large international global companies with the DEI agenda, diversity, equality and inclusion agenda. And this is what you have to do for the results of that money. We know one of them at least one of them that has thrown that back at their faces and put out a public statement saying they're not going to be involved in any of this. Their bottom line, and I know from someone on the inside that it was the directors deciding this was not their core business and they needed to focus on their bottom line and get back to Belfast. And I hope that that's going to happen more and more. The investor went on to Harley Davidson after them, so I don't think they had much more luck with Harley Davidson, but it's one of the tactics that they're using to get these big global companies.
Thanks, Heather. I'd also refer people to an event we held on the CAS review, and we had a number of whistleblowers from the Tavistock Clinic speaking at that, so that's up on our YouTube channel if you want to watch that. Okay, I'm going to come over this side. Come down the front here. Just wait for the microphone. Rob, right down the front. I'll take a couple more from the audience on that side, and then I will ask Jeff Dudgeon to come up and say a few words.
Just a question for Heather and maybe Toby. There is a view that somebody attacks online. People are kind of using somebody's culture war issues as an excuse, as like a proxy attack on women. Now, I know Twitter has become increasingly more toxic with the Musk takeover, and he's proclaimed as a place for free speech. So how do you balance free speech without people using it as cover for just pure sexism and hatred of women?
I think it's a cover for misogyny. How am I going to stop it?
No. I mean, do you think as part of this is motivated by just like a lot of guys, this kind of incels or whatever, just hatred of women, and they're using somebody's culture war issues as just an excuse to attack women? That's kind of what I'm getting at.
No. Yeah, they're going to hate women whether we've got a cultural issue or not. They're just going to find another way of hating women. It is infuriating, and I call on all men, lovely, lovely men, stand up, because your voice, you laugh. Your voices are heard more than our voices are. It's frustrating, but it's a fact. I can't do anything about it. Rosie Duffield, fabulous Labour MP, can say things until she's blue in the face and gets ignored. I mean, it's really badly ignored by the rest of her party. Tony Blair can come along and say the same thing, and I go, oh, there's maybe got something there. So, one of you speak out. Online is a terrible battleground. There are a number of different fronts to the battle. That is just one of them. The war is not going to be won on X, but it's a bit of a training ground. Lots of our lovely women on there go on and let off steam, some of it quite hysterically. And I mean that could be comedically. Yes, I'm talking about you. But that's not where the battle really is. The battle is for those women to be able to say the things that they're saying, using their names and their pictures and their avatars. And that's what my aim is to be, so that they can, all these women around the country that are not happy with what's going on, and a lot of men, but men tend not to have to hide. Women are the ones that have to hide because we suffer more. We'll lose our jobs. Men won't lose their jobs.
Thank you. And Kate wanted to come in.
But I just wanted to say, I was brought up with a very old adage, which everybody knows about, sticks and stones will break your bones, but names will never hurt you. And I do find, I think sometimes people can be a little bit precious about Twitter and what's on X. And frankly, the best thing is, block. I just block anything nasty. And I don't actually, I think people have the right, provided they're not actually suggesting they harm you because you're a woman or they have a sexist view that is leading to some kind of violence. If they want to say things like that, well, sad people. I don't really feel that that's, to me, an issue, really, that makes me worry about my free speech versus sexism. I expect a lot of people disagree, but that's my view.
It does seem that when you're fully, if you're fully out in public life, and you get it all the time. You get it all. Well, you both get it all the time, but also you've already built the armor, and people can't necessarily target other aspects of your life, perhaps. Whereas for a lot of the women who are receiving this kind of vitriol, the danger is that it leaches away from kind of civic life and into their working life or their personal lives, and that the kind of threats become properly threatening to their livelihoods, etc., which obviously the kind of cases we deal with all the time as well. A couple more questions. Yes, down here. Where's the... thanks.
My name is David Vance, and I've got an observation and a quick question. Observation, if Keir Starmer knew that the Free Speech Union was behind bars tonight in Belfast, I reckon he'd be really happy about that, because he wants the rest of the country in a similar place. And then the question for Toby is, Toby, in the aftermath of the protests / riots following the Southport massacre of the young girls, were you surprised at the behaviour, the language used by from Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper, Crown Prosecution Service, the Home Office? Because all of a sudden, there was a chill went right across X, immeasurably improved by Elon Musk's acquisition, by the way, and you know, is that a foretaste of what you think we're going to see an awful lot more of?
Thank you. We should check the doors that we haven't actually all been locked in.
I expected things to get worse under this government, but I didn't expect them to get so bad so quickly. And even I think, have been shocked by the absolute contempt in which they evidently hold free speech. Just to answer your question, I think the solution to people saying obnoxious, offensive things on X is not for governments or the EU to step in and impose prohibitions on misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech. I think the solution is to give people, users, the tools to specify whether they want to have an unrestricted Wild West type experience on X or a much more sanitized, anodyne experience. And you can do that. But I think you give people the tools to be their own content moderators. Don't trust states and state regulators to do that for you, because they'll invariably weaponize those tools in order to suppress dissent. I was disappointed by how many people that were arrested and charged because of things they'd said on social media, either about the Southport murders or the reaction to the murders. Disappointed by how many of them pleaded guilty. I think they came under enormous pressure to plead guilty, and in many cases were told that if they didn't, they'd likely be kept on remand for at least a year, and there'd be very little chance of them being bailed. One guy we know said to us that he pleaded guilty because he wanted to be home in time for Christmas. And he was led to believe that if he pleaded guilty, he'd get a relatively light sentence. In fact, he's not going to be home for Christmas. We have got a couple of cases we're working on in which people have pled not guilty, and we think they have a reasonable chance of being acquitted. One guy pleaded guilty to stirring up racial hatred because he had reposted 3 memes on Facebook. And they were on the face of it, funny memes. They were about Muslims, but they weren't, by any stretch of the imagination, likely to inflame the disturbances, to cause people to leave their homes and go out and riot. It just feels as though, when you look at the extraordinary lenience shown to Hugh Edwards, it's as though the values of the authorities now are that Islamophobia, even of a very mild kind, is more severely punished than paedophilia, which is an extraordinary state of affairs, and I didn't think we'd get there as quickly as we have.
Just a quick point. I think Elon Musk is wonderful. He gets things wrong. Of course he does. He's a busy man. He's the richest man in the world. He's a genius. There's no question about him being a genius. What he's done in 3 or 4 different areas has been beyond almost anybody ever. And he cares passionately about free speech. And he is making mistakes, but he's on the side of people like us.
Thanks, Will. I can see a few hands, but I'm going to ask Jeff Dudgeon, MBE, to come up. He's going to come to the lectern and just, he's going to give us, a tour d'horizon. That's what Jeff said he's going to do. So he's going to give us a kind of a view from Belfast, from Northern Ireland.
Excuse me. Thanks very much, Jan, and everyone else for coming over to give us such a good evening. Yes, Jan promised a tour d'horizon, so I will here now and briefly deal with what's been happening since I spoke at our January meeting, the highs and the lows and the achievements. Enemies of free speech have been felled, with key warriors gone. Nicola Sturgeon, Leo Varadkar. It gets better. Jacinta Ardern. Not to mention Humza Yousaf. And Mark Drakeford in Wales. So is free speech winning? Well, the UK is moving in the opposite direction under Sir Two-Tier Keir. As Kate has explained, the long march through the institutions has been completed. Reversals have hardly started, but there have been some victories, notably in the courts, as Simon has indicated, and may yet happen here. Scotland has seen turnarounds on accepting the Cass report, conversion therapy, and a separate Scottish Bill of Rights, as Heather has indicated. The referenda in Ireland that I referred to in January have changed everything south of the border. I said then in a rare, accurate prediction, I quote, "In March, Southern voters have to answer 2 related questions in a needless referendum. The first is whether to remove a somewhat outdated reference to women from the Constitution, the only particular reference to women in the document. The second would redefine the family as anything you want it to be. With defeat looming, this may be the high tide of Irish identitarianism." And it was. The result finished off Leo, put the Greens out in the subsequent elections, and checked the rise of Sinn Féin, who are in retreat in the south, although woke as ever in the north. But the hate crime bill continues in the Dáil. Those referenda gave impetus to, or enabled, a particularly nasty burst of ultranationalism in the Republic, far right, you might say, which continues. The woke can't deal with that sort of extremism, as it can't deal with truth. And if you watched the RTE program last night, you can recognize the fact that the academic experts who spoke endlessly on the program had absolutely nothing to offer how to deal with unpleasant and unnecessary hatred that makes the race riots, if you want to call them that, or protests in Belfast in July look rather minor. So it's become our responsibility as free speech warriors. We can explain and divert the rage, but we need the media to be honest and to avoid censoring reality, which just feeds the frustrations of ordinary people. So just to run through locally what's been happening. The Alliance Party may have peaked electorally, but there are no signs of it waning in its enthusiasm for restrictions, much like the Liberal Democrats. Naomi Long's hate speech legislation is still gestating, as Toby and Simon have pointed out. The Ulster Unionist Party's Liberal leader was removed, some said because of his liberalism, but he was replaced with an even more liberal leader. So I think the assessments were inaccurate, but I'm only a member. The DUP is split three ways between Liberals, local heroes like Jim Shannon, and Tuvies. The Tuvies are the followers of Jim Allister MP. He leads the TUV, a party which has good instincts on free speech, which may be hard to swallow for some, but it is true. I was on the panel for the prestigious Gay Pride Talks Back event in July, representing the party. As expected, I was the only voice out of step with the orthodoxy and trans, and was duly shouted at and shouted down. I pointed out some realities, however. The ban on puberty blockers for children, introduced by my party's Minister of Health, was here to stay, and rightly so. So since then, the ban has been extended, leaving Sinn Féin heavily exposed as that party failed to veto the extension. Trans is now the test issue, much like gay marriage was earlier. Then you're either a good person or one beyond redemption, depending on your position. But the boot today is on the other foot, and the progressive parties are instead being tested on the trans issue. I also pointed out Labour's proposed conversion therapy law would be very limited legislation if it ever appeared, not least because of the European Convention on Human Rights, Articles numbers 9 and 10, which Simon referred to, and that Scotland was likely to ask Westminster to include it within their bill, while the same position would be ultimately adopted by the Assembly, which I suspect it will be too. Because the Assembly traditionally asks Westminster to do the needful when they can't agree on anything contentious like welfare reform, abortion, legacy, gay marriage. So I'll end on a very recent concern, the Northern Ireland Public Health Bill. Now, it's up for consultation. In fact, you have to have your views in by the end of the month. Some of its proposed impositions are positively draconian. When I was first sent an excerpt, I thought it was fake news and advised caution. But when reading the draft, it requires, amongst other things, a person to submit to medical examination or be removed to a hospital or be detained in a hospital or other similar establishment, be kept in isolation or in quarantine, disinfected or decontaminated, forced to wear protective clothing, forced to provide information or answer questions about their health. There would, however, be no forced vaccinations. For that, we can be mildly grateful. I don't know where these suggested restrictions originated, but they have to be resisted. The consultation ends in a week. Opposition is mounting, but it is early days. And the European Convention on Human Rights, and in particular the articles on freedom of expression and belief, have to be used. The Convention is here to stay for at least another decade probably, and it has many articles in it that we only hear about Article 2 in Northern Ireland, but there are many other, 16 other articles which can be used to our advantage. So get on with it.
Thank you, Jeff. And I don't know how many people have seen it, but there's an amazing video that I was alerted to where Jeff takes on a panel at a Pride debate here in Belfast. And it's just the most brilliant example of somebody being able to, well, willing to engage with people who disagree with him, but also of just doing so with such grace. And so if you want a lesson in how to carry on engaging in public life, even when the tides are turning against us, then watch what Jeff does. It's really exemplary. I just wanted to come back to a few things on the panel before we wrap up. Simon, is there anything you wanted to say about the latest updates in the cases you're handling?
Well, in terms of what I am allowed to say, the good news is they are moving through the courts apace. The Belfast Film Festival case, which is the employment discrimination case, is listed in January for a week, and it's going to be a trial. I don't think there's any prospect of that one resolving itself, so we're busy preparing for that, aren't we? And Similarly, we had our first review before the judge with the Robinson's Bar case on Monday. You might have seen that in the local media. And I anticipate a listing date at some point in the spring. So it looks like the first half of the year I'll have to do some work, unfortunately. But yeah, the defence appears to be characterised by those individuals within the bar who were wearing T-shirts that said statements such as "woman equals adult human female" is actually offensive. It's offensive to our other clientele. It's offensive to our staff. So never mind that we are discriminating against you for holding that belief. We will put our other customers and staff first if they feel that they are offended. Funnily enough, whenever the bar was cleared by our clients, there was nobody left in it. So I'm not sure which ones were left to offend. Maybe they were hiding in the toilets. So that's a challenge. I think there's a decision has been made to fight it along ideological lines rather than focusing on a legal defence. Maybe think that there's deeper pockets in the progressive wallet there than there is with us reactionaries.
And then, Kate, I just wanted to see what you thought about where we're at with women's sports, because obviously that's one of the things that most people, have become aware of, I think, over the last year or so. And I'm, minded of people like Sharon Davis, we had a great event with Sharon when her book came out, Martina Navratilova, Daley Thompson. I've just wondered what you think the prospects are for making some more progress.
Well, I think, as we've said about other things, there's been a kind of culture of fear and intimidation which has forced a lot of women, particularly younger women, out of sport or walk away and keep quiet, because what there seems to be still is this push towards inclusion in sport, which is actually excluding, it's female exclusion. And I think what we have to be demanding, some governing bodies have taken action, particularly athletics, swimming, cycling, have actually adopted what they call a female category protection, usually after something's happened in their sport. But football, which is the growing sport for young women, has not adopted that. They've taken they say nationally that they've got 72 people that they have accepted who are trans, that they can play in women's sport. But what is not happening is that there are a lot of people, particularly in smaller clubs across the country, where someone turns up and no one is able to sort of stop them being part of the team, which has then led to safety grounds as well. I mean, apart from the whole question of unfairness and in terms of competition, it is actually not safe for sometimes for women to be playing with people who who are obviously still men. And I think what we need to be demanding is all sports governing bodies have that section which ensures that they have to have a female category at every level, and that all gyms and local councils have to ensure that female changing rooms, toilets and women-only activities exclude all male, however they identify themselves. So there's a lot more to be done. And I did speak to someone quite high up in the Northern Ireland situation in football here, who's high up in women's football. And her attitude was, oh, well, we haven't had a problem here. Well, I think the issue has to be that you have to be ahead of the problem and you have to get this sorted before it gets to a situation. So it is going to be a growing problem and something that people just have to speak out and recognise that it is not common sense to have mixed sport where you have women playing against men in a situation where the men are saying they are women and they're clearly not women because of the fact how they were born, and you have to keep to that. It's just, I mean, as a former sports minister, I was just horrified when this all started to happen recently, and it is fairly recent, because it just never occurred to me that this would be what could happen in sport. So I think we have to speak out about it, and we have to get, the media and journalists and all to take it much more seriously and not just see it as a sort of, oh, well, that's just not a very important issue. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah. So, do you want to tell us what
you've got planned for women's
Well,
rights?
I'll pick up on that, Kate. We call it the inclusion delusion. So to fight back on that, there are so many things that we can that I can go on about. Grab me later. I can just talk forever, which is why I sit here thinking, oh, which example is more appropriate here or not. I wanted to say to you that predominantly, and not wholesale, because not all men, predominantly men are the predators and women are the victims. Women don't know which of the men are the predators. That's why we have safeguarding rules in place to give us that comfort. That is what is being eroded. And at the moment, we don't know who to be afraid of, but we are afraid. We're not necessarily afraid in social media, although it's not very nice a lot of the time. But is it people that we work with? It can be people in our families. Is it the police? Because the police are well and truly captured and they're training it from the top to the bottom. So we're swimming in a world where we don't know who we can trust and who will have our backs. So once again, men, speak out. We're growing in number. Belfast, if you've got any, Northern Ireland, if you've got any lovely ladies that want to join, you don't have to go out on the streets and protest. You can simply sit by your computer and write letters to your assembly members and MPs. Thanks, Heather.
Ruth, any final remarks from you?
Well, thank you. Just that if we lose this, we'll never get it back. If we lose free speech. This is the battle of our lives and our future, and we've got to fight it. We've got to fight it absolutely ruthlessly. So that's it. Get busy.
Thanks, Ruth. Toby.
Yeah, just to echo what Heather was saying about how captured the police have become, I was asked to comment by the newsletter, I think yesterday, on the fact that the PSNI wants to scrap the dwelling defence. It's extraordinary, isn't it? You'd think they'd have enough to do without actually policing conversations in people's private homes. I mean, how are they possibly going to do that, given how stretched and under-resourced they are? It's just crazy. But I want to address the point made by the gentleman who asked the first question. I feel we've neglected you, sir, and haven't actually addressed your question, so I wanted to try and answer that. I think you certainly have a point that it looks as though, as populations across the Western world have become more prosperous, have had fewer existential risks to worry about, they've begun to prize safety over liberty. And that certainly seemed to be the case during the pandemic. I used to tell myself that totalitarian, authoritarian political movements could never take root in Britain. I took comfort from George Orwell's line, I think in The Lion and the Unicorn, that no military in the UK could goose step down the street because people would just burst out laughing. And I took succor from this idea that there was in the British soul a suspicion of authoritarianism, that we would just be blowing raspberries, cocking a snoot, that our inner Sancho Panzas would ridicule any Oswald Mosley types who came along to try and oppress us. But that illusion was shattered during the lockdowns, in which it was extraordinary how willingly people went along with these absolutely absurd, draconian restrictions. I think Jonathan Sumption described the lockdowns as the greatest interference in personal freedom in the history of the British Isles, including during wartime. So certainly I had a crisis of faith and thought, blimey, is this cause lost? But I think there are some things we can take comfort from. There are some reasons to remain hopeful. One is, as Geoffrey said, many of the politicians who are in power, who imposed the lockdowns, have found themselves out of office. It's almost as though being in office during the pandemic was some awful curse. So Drakeford's gone, Nicola Sturgeon's gone, Boris Johnson's gone, Humza Yousaf, who was the health minister at the time of the lockdown, he's gone, Jacinda Ardern's gone, Dan Andrews in the state of Victoria's gone, Trudeau's clinging on, he'll probably go at the next election in Canada. So it's as though the public are waking up to the fact that something terribly wrong happened, that there was this grotesque interference in their liberty, completely disproportionate to the risk posed by the virus. And they're beginning to punish the political leaders responsible for that. I think another reason for hope is that I think the technocratic managerial class that have been in charge across Europe and across most of the English-speaking world, their attitude to dissent, to challenge of their most fundamental values, of their programs, whether it's globalization, mass migration, celebration of LGBT rights, their way of enforcing these particular political programs is to demonize anyone who dissents from them, anyone who criticizes them in the public square as far right, as beyond the pale. They don't want to engage in debate. Their policy, the policy of the trans rights activists of no debate, that seems to be the policy to a great extent of our centrist masters. Let's not engage in debate. Let's not try and make a decent fist of defending these policies in the public square. Let's just cast out and demonize and smear anyone who challenges them. Didn't work in the case of the trans rights activists. They're now losing that battle. And it looks as though they are going to lose. They haven't lost yet. There's a lot left to do, but it looks like they're going to lose that fight. And similarly, if you look at the results in the European parliamentary elections earlier this year, an extraordinary number of populist parties did extremely well. It looks like Macron may lose the next French presidential election. I think Keir Starmer, God willing, will only be a one-term prime minister. Their policy of refusing to debate, of refusing to set out their case in the public square and make an argument for it, of just demonizing their opponents and suppressing free speech because they don't want to have to defend themselves, it's not working. And I think eventually they'll wake up to the fact that it's not working, and whether they do or not, they'll be turfed out. So I think you're right that we don't value our liberties and particularly free speech as highly as we should. And that may be particularly true of young people. But it's up to us to persuade them, to persuade people who don't realize how important free speech is. I mean, often the radicals, the political activists, the people who you would expect to be defending free speech and who did defend free speech until relatively recently, everything's going their way, so they feel they don't have to defend free speech any longer. But Ira Glasser, the legendary head of the American Civil Liberties Union, who fought a number of really pivotal First Amendment battles in the 1960s, enabling the civil rights movement to organize, protest, march, he made a really good point. He said that speech restrictions are it's a bit like when you've got the enemy in your sights, speech restrictions can seem a good idea, like poison gas can seem like a good idea when you've got the enemy in your sights, but then the wind changes. I think we've got to persuade younger people that the wind may be in their sails at the moment. They may not need to worry about being silenced, being demonized, smeared, cast out, like older people are, people who don't share their radical progressive views, but the wind can change, the wind will change. So it's in their interests to defend free speech. I think we all need to make that argument, but if we can make that argument, I think we can still win this fight.
Thanks, Toby. And thank you very much to our panel, and especially thank you to those the whole members of our advisory council, you could go to our website and go to the Northern Ireland page, and you'll see the biographies of all of our advisory council members. I'm pretty sure that's probably going to grow. So we're open to recommendations. If you've got any suggestions of great people that we could also invite to join that council. The video of this event will go up there as well, I should think. So if you want to catch up on it or recommend it to other people, you can send them there. I also wanted to thank a few people. I wanted to thank Andrea, who, as ever, is... These are the people... She's the one that brought us to this venue. She's a very ambitious events person to talk to, because she's always trying to get us to go to ever more glamorous places. So I'd also therefore like to thank all the staff at the Crumlin Road Jail, which those of you watching on video may not realise that's where we are. But we're at the Crumlin Road Jail, which is a fantastic place to hold events at, and people hopefully have had the chance to go and have a look downstairs and give us something to put the fear of God in us and make sure we carry on fighting for freedom when you see the cells downstairs. I also wanted to thank Rob Kellner, who's come all the way from Manchester to help out. A brilliant FSU member who organises his own meet-up group in Manchester called Counselling Council Culture, which is very hard to say, but it's a very good opportunity for people there to have their say. And also Fraser Hudson, who's the director of our Scottish office, who's come over from Edinburgh. Who grab Fraser and have a chat.
Thank you to Jan for organising all of this. Yes.